quite a lot of buttons at the moment, including one flame wall, but as you can see, the flame wall isn't going down that often. All in all, still working very well so far.
Welcome everyone. Today we
Easy
have
enough.
updated marksman guide. As you can see behind me, we'll be testing our marksman with over 2000 corruption in variety of builds. And before I show you guys the build, you can see that I'm currently sitting on pretty high warding. Now you can't see exactly how much warding I'm sitting on, but I'm actually sitting on close to 16,000 warding. So this is actually a new adjustment of the warding build, and you might be thinking, hey man, wouldn't this be super expensive and wouldn't this be super hard to achieve? But surprisingly, my goal for this set of videos and also updates is to make the build cheaper and also more accessible for players. So what you're looking at is actually a cheaper version of the warding build, and this will require you to only have 2 or 1 legendary potential items and using more exalted items, which can be crafted, tailor adjusted to your build if you're lacking resistance or if you're lacking damage. Now looking at the demonstrations, I have decided to clear the entire dungeon because I keep missing the objective monsters. But you can see our build is quite durable, it still deals tons of damage, and the best part about this is this build is considered much cheaper than the previous build.
Everything is still going very
Now I
well.
know you guys might be thinking, hey man, how come you're using the warding set, not HP set? We are working on adjusting the build one at a time. So the first focus is to update the warding set for a cheaper setup and also stronger setup. And you can see this can clear 2000 corruption without a problem. The next upcoming guide will focus on the marksman using the health setup and giving you guys a cheaper setup for the HP setup. Because a lot of players are saying that the build are getting super costly even for the 2 LP or 3 LP items, so we're trying to make the build cheaper, accessible, while strong enough to take down any content with over 2000 corruption.
Yeah, that's the wrong one.
So now coming over to the boss as a demonstration of the damage for this build.
Oh well.
We're picking over the Abomination just because we happen to be testing on this boss, and you can see that during the testing replays I have to clear the 4 corners. So I decided to attach this part in the replays as well so you guys can have a better summary. Now because the build is cheaper, it will be sacrificing some damage, but surprisingly guys, let's have a look at the damage against a 2000 corruption boss. And we took it down within 7 seconds. Yes, this particular change of setup basically reduced maybe 10% of the damage, but we still deal tons of damage against a single target, and this is never a problem for the build. Now you might be wondering, man, what is the new setup? So in the replays before the fights, I will be demonstrating to the new setup to you guys. You can see that I have taken down the unique and also legendary rings, which can be costly to find, and I have decided to chew down some of the legendary potentials. Now the idols can be adjusted should you miss any of the resistance, and you can see at the fight I'm sitting on about 70% all resist capped with close to 600 cold resistance, and as for the stationary warding, we're sitting on 17,000 stationary warding. So this build is much more durable and should be cheaper for you guys to plan and also to be crafting this build if you're using the warding set. Now if you come over to the build planners, you can see there are several versions of the build. The version I'm currently using does have a 3 legendary potential weapon. I then know that yes guys, the daggers are very expensive for 3 LP. The build works perfectly with a 2 LP weapon, so you don't have to spend over 100 million for 3 LP weapons, which I'll explain on the second part. Now compared to the previous build, this build definitely does not need all the 4 legendary potentials. If you're trying to use the build in its basic form, just 1 legendary potential can do if you get lucky with a crucial crafting. Now 2 legendary potential is preferable, and this is how we were able to test clear over 2000 corruption over there. Now you guys might be wondering, hey Matt, what about the old setup? How does this fare in the higher level dungeons? So here we have crafted the older setup as well, and you can see the older setup with some min and max gears sitting over 13,000 warding, with slightly less HP, and you can see the gears as well. The daggers are not crafted perfectly simply because we don't need the lifesteal. And as you can see over here, most of the items are 2 to 3 legendary potential. This is the old setup that was recommended to us, that was recommended by us to you guys when we first started the warding set for the marksman. Now to keep in mind guys, we are testing those setups on the offline characters, because currently after multiple videos and also after Rex's video, the inflation of the price is ridiculous. And this is the goal of making this particular guide. So it is cheaper for you guys to be using a cheaper setup. Now if you do want to have a look, the older setup does tons of damage. It is quite speedy, and yes, with high legendary potentials, you can deal tons of damage. The downside of the older setup is you are doing way much more overcapping damage than you needed. And what that means is you're overkilling the monsters while reducing your survivability. And this is the reason to have the new setup. So if you guys want to see the replays of comparison at the end of the videos, you can see our old setup mow through the map super fast. But the downside is sometimes you even die to ground effects like this. Now while testing, my friend was standing on the poison and they killed him. Yes, you can see that the particular setup is susceptible to a lot of the ground effects, and this is why the more defensive warding setup that I provided to you guys in the builder's guide will give us more survivability. So let's come over to the fights using the old setup, and you can see the slight adjustment to higher damage. So fighting over the boss, you can see the previous setup with more damage using higher legendary potential items, which cost hundreds and also hundreds millions more gold. It actually took down the boss in 6 seconds. Yes, I made a comparison replay. So the old previous setup with more costly setup took down the boss in 6 seconds. And in comparison guys, the new cheaper setup will take the boss down in 7 seconds. Yes, the damage loss is not going to be dramatic. And yes, on the second part of the video, I'll talk about potential ways to reduce the lag. I had a lot of questions on that, and there's a lot of small tips I'm going to share with you guys. So coming over to the builder's guide, you can see there are several versions of the crafted marksman build, and if you have a look at this video, I actually had one setup for each stage of the game. But what a lot of viewers are saying is the setup is too expensive, it's unachievable and also not practical to list all of those legendary items into full potentials. So if you remember the previous video, we do have a video to teach you which of the best legendary potentials you should be crafting depending on the priorities. But in this video, I want to introduce you guys to this new setup for the warding set. Now if we briefly go through the items, we're using the daggers, the chest, the boots, the gloves and also the helmet, and together with the relic. What has changed will be the rings, the belt and also the amulet. So this particular setup actually gives us more choices of affixes and also stats. We can even seal affixes should you be missing resistance. Now for the case that you can't craft affixes like those, you can remove some of the idols to balance out your resistance to all 75%. So the biggest change compared to the previous build is that we're no longer stacking the doom damage with a belt and also a ring, which will give us over 20% bonus damage multiplier. And similarly, we're trying to not stack on this Oceanian ring, which can be very costly even though it gives percentage damage increase per stack of shock, which is incredibly powerful but yet very expensive to get even to 2 legendary potential. And finally, we're not trying to heal using potions, and this particular amulet does not provide us additional stats compared to what other amulets does. So here are the adjustments. We'll be using the base of Ivory Wings, which will provide us narcotic resistance, warding decay threshold, and also ability to craft multiple affixes like lightning damage, mana regen, cold resistance, and also elemental resistance. And any resistance we're missing, we can be crafting onto those rings. As for the amulet, we'll be going with the Implicit that reduces damage over time. And this is one of the biggest source of damage that can kill us in the later stage, over 1500 or 2000 corruptions. And the ability to craft those exalted items means that we can be using tier 5, tier 6 items, and this will still work guys. Ideally you want tier 7 penetration, but even if you get a tier 5 or tier 6, this can also work. And finally guys, we can be using experimental belts that give us tons of armor with Implicit, while gaining mana while using potions, lightning damage, increased health, more health, and even craft this one with higher cold resistance. So yes, the ability to focus on crafting exalted items for the trinkets will be the big game changer. And as you guys can see in replays, the defensive capacity for this set means we have 2900 or even higher HP and over 17,000 warding. And this will definitely be more survivable compared to the previous build, which deals way more damage and it takes down the boss in 6 seconds. But with the variation of the setup, you can take down the boss within 7 or 8 seconds, so the damage loss is not going to be major. Now I know a lot of you may be thinking, hey Matt, I can't get the 3LP weapon. And here we have a tuned down version which can take you over 1000 corruption or even 1500 corruption. So the daggers are made to 2LP over here. And yes, you don't need armor shredding or lifesteal on the daggers. And over here, we'll be having armor shredding crafted on the amulet. And this doesn't have to be a tier 5. If you can seal a tier 1 or tier 2 armor shredding effect, that is enough for the build. Now just to show you guys what I mean by enough armor shredding, if you look at the debuff on the boss, look at the debuffs over here. We're stacking over 200, 300 armor shredding and also additional effects, and this means the incremental damage we're building up just having one item that provides us with armor shredding effect will be massive. Because we're proccing so many traps, so many triggers of detonating arrow, the armor shredding effect really stacks up. And by my friend's estimations, after 200 or 300 stacks of armor shredding, the further armor shredding will only reduce the boss's defense by 1% after 50 or 100 more shredding stacks. So having the armor shredding effect not on the weapon is definitely fine. Now of course guys, if you have the armor shredding effect on the weapon, that is fine as well. Because the build does tons of damage, as long as you have critical strike multipliers, lightning damage or flat landing damage, that is fine as well. So the build does not need 3 LP weapons, which can be very costly currently in the market. Now if you look at the tuned down version, all the gears are set to 2 legendary potentials, and some of the expensive gears are set to 1 legendary potential. And this should help you guys change into a cheaper build if you're currently looking into play the marksman to go for 1000, 1500 corruption, and while looking forward to transition into the next setup. And as I mentioned previously guys, if you're looking to change the idols, you can feel free to do so. Because the setup wants you to be crafting some exalted items, if you can't get those stats, you can be finding resistance and also health on the idols, and you can be changing this around. Now in terms of the blessings, we're still going with critical strike multipliers, all resistance, armor, and also cold resistance, together with lightning damage. Now I have had a few questions and also some testings on whether lightning damage or lightning shredding. So in this regards, chance to shred lightning resistance is not bad as well. But as you can see in the replays against the boss with over 2000 corruption, we don't really have a problem dealing damage to the boss. And most of the time, your major issue, so you can see the replays, we don't have a problem with 2000 corruption boss. Most of the time, our major issue is against monsters, because we want to kill them fast. Having higher damage will allow you to have higher initial damage, which can mow down groups of enemies. While having lightning shredding effects means you can take down single target more as you stack those debuffs. So after some testing and also discussion, we have decided to go with increased lightning damage so you can take down small monsters fast. Because this build does not have trouble with bosses. With the excessive amount of armor shedding effects we're applying to the boss, it dies super fast. But of course guys, if you're already having the lightning shedding effect, that is fine as well, because you will be doing higher damage against a single target. Now briefly going through the skills. There's not a major change with the skills, and we have kept most of the skills. Again guys, if you want to do more AoE damage, you can unperk this one and come over to this one.
What's up everybody, it's Tuna.
We just want a little bit damage multipliers and also critical chances.
3.23
Most of the skills are
Ultimatum
similar
is coming
to
back,
past.
and it's going to
And
be here
here,
to
if
stay.
you guys remember,
Essentially, I
we're
just wanted to
going
talk a
with
little bit
increased
about
dark
everything
shot
that we know
and
so
also
far.
increased spreading
There's
of the
still a lot
smoke
of
bomb.
information.
You
that
can
is
go for
yet to
this
be
value
seen.
points over here,
However,
but this will mean to
judging by
remove
what
some
we see
radius
on
over
the,
here and also some
on the
frequency over
patch
here.
notes, as well as all of
We
the other
are
information
getting
that
the
we know from the
elusive
league
perk,
itself.
and this is
I've
actually
compiled
really good, as you're
information
going to see in
here
the
that you
replays.
guys can digest
After
before
dashing,
you go
for the
into
next
the league,
seconds, you
knowing
pretty
what
much
you're getting
have
yourself into,
a
because
lot of
I'm
dodge,
sure a lot of
and
you
this will
guys
reduce the
are
damage
hearing,
you take
it's crazy,
against multiple
and you want to
enemies.
spec into it and try it.
And finally for the
Just some things
shurikens,
to
it is
consider
pretty much
here
the
that we'll
same.
go through.
You'll be gaining
First of
increased
all, what is
armor,
Ultimatum?
increased duration,
It is a semi-hardcore
and the
mechanic,
shuriken will deal
meaning that
lightning
if you
damage
die
while giving you shock
or
chances
you leave
against
the
them.
area, you basically
Now in terms
lose
of the
all your
passes, we
rewards, you get
haven't
nothing
changed
for
too
it.
much,
And since
and
the
we have
monsters don't
decided
drop
to
any
not go
loot,
with dexterity
basically
over
just
here,
gonna be,
just so we can
your
get
time
some
is
additional
wasted, right?
resistance and
But,
also dodge rating,
that's
because
what
the
makes it
build
fun
does
as well.
not
It's a
lack
risk
damage.
versus reward
The
mechanic,
build really
and
wants
it's
to be more
round-based.
defensive,
So
and this is
essentially,
the
there's
reason
always an
behind
option for
this
you
new
to opt
setup,
out
and also
and
to
get
make
all
the
of the
build more
rewards that you
cheaper
have
and also
gotten up until
accessible.
up until that
Now I
point.
don't think I need to
That's
explain the
pretty
skill
cool,
rotations
you know.
too much. As
If you
long
don't
as you
see, like,
guys
a really
are
good reward on
mobile
the
and
next
also
round, but you
constantly
already have
moving,
some pretty
you
good
should be
stuff,
dealing
you
tons
could
of
always
damage
just say,
as you throw your
take
traps.
rewards, get
as
me out
long
of
as
here.
you're
So,
managing your
it
mana,
has ramping
you should be
difficulty.
fine.
We
And
don't
most of the
know
time,
exactly what
it's
the
hard to
scaling
spend
will
on
be
your
like,
mana because
but
things
what that
die so
means is
fast.
that, you know, you'll start
One
and
thing
it'll
to
be really
notice
easy.
is
Once
that
you
for
get to
this
wave
build,
9,
because
10,
we are low on health,
upward,
you want to be
up till
dashing as
13,
fast as you
it'll
can.
be pretty
So
damn
this will
difficult. The monsters
regenerate
will
more
deal
mana
more
to keep
damage.
yourself up
There'll
with
be
higher
stacking
mana and also
modifiers
dealing more
from
damage.
things that you have chosen on your
Now,
way
before I
to
finish the
wave
video,
13.
some of
And in
viewers
general,
have
it's
recommended
gonna
to
be
try
kind
to
of
remove the
difficult. So,
damage
yeah.
displays
But
to
one of the
reduce
cool
the
things
lag
that
for
I'm
this
looking
build.
forward to see, it's
And
like a
other
weird
viewers
small
have said
thing.
to
There's
try
pause
streamer
technology.
mode for this
Essentially,
particular
you know, once
setup,
you see the
so
screen
that can reduce the
here
lag.
where you
I
get to
have
choose your
tested
reward,
out
your
this
entire map is going to
using
be
without
paused.
damage.
So that means that you can
Now, some
actually,
parts
you know,
this looks
do
okay.
ultimatum.
Some other
and
parts
if
this
you
still
need
looks
to
a
do
little
something,
laggy.
you can just like leave
So
the
it
computer,
is
come
really a
back, and you'll
personal
just
choice,
be
guys.
here.
I like
And
to
I
see
wish
the
they
numbers,
implemented
and
this
I don't
mechanic
mind a
onto
little bit
other
lag.
mechanics as
But
well.
if you
But
find that lag
what is
too much,
ultimatum
you
basically?
can
It's
take away
yeah,
the
get
damage
rich or
numbers,
die trying.
and this could
basically is
potentially
what it
help
is,
you
because
guys to
you'll
reduce some
be
lags
getting a
coming
lot
from the
of
build
crazy
dealing too
rewards.
much damage
However,
and also too
you'll
many
also be losing
instances.
some to
Now, at the same time, guys,
so, yeah,
I
don't be
have
too
turned
greedy.
off
So now I'd
Stream
like to
Shake
go
and
over some
also
of the
Stream
differences
Check
between
intensity.
the old
Together
ultimatum
with
and the new
lowering my
ultimatum.
graphics, I'm
From
trying to
what we know
reduce the
from
lag
patch
as
notes
much as I
themselves.
can.
But yeah,
And
new
also,
ultimatum
guys, you can
gets
go for streamer
scarabs
mode,
as well
and
as
this might
sextants.
help you
You have
with your
10
lags as well.
rounds guaranteed, whereas it used
So
to
what
be
I
just
do now
a
is
random
I'll provide you
number of
guys with
rounds.
the testing
The
replay
boss
so
is
you can
back to
see
being
the
RNG.
comparison of
So
the new
as of right
setup
now, there
compared
are
to the
fragments
previous
that you
warding
can
setup.
combine.
And you can see
that,
the damage
pretty
numbers,
much
and also you can
guarantees
see how
access
fast
to
we
the
run
boss,
through
and you can just
bosses.
target farm him,
Now, if you guys
whatever.
find my
But
videos
now
and
he's
also
back to
guides
being
helpful,
RNG.
and also
There's
want to
also
support my
Atlas
passion
passive
in
skills
making
that
more
you can
guides
spec
and also
into
more videos
to
for the
sort of
last
tailor
epoch, and
your
also more
experience with the
games to
mechanic
come like
itself,
Path
as
of
well as
Exile.
boost the
Please
rewards and
consider joining
increase
me on Patreon,
the
and
downsides.
also here I have created
There
my
are
Ko-Fi
negative
page.
mods that scale up
You
to
can also
T4.
support me directly through
Monsters no longer
donations,
drop through.
but
This is a big
supporting
one
me
because
continuously with
essentially
Wombo's membership
what
will
this
mean a
means is
lot
that the
for
only
my
reward
future
that you'll be
updated
getting
videos
are
and to
from,
become
you know, the
financially
reward
sustainable
window
so I can be
themselves.
continuing
Also,
making videos
since
for you
Metamorph
guys
no longer
and doing what I love
exists,
the most,
Catalysts
and that is to
and all
share
of
and
those
also
kind
teach
of
our
rewards have
communities
now
as
moved
I
over
dive
into
into different
Ultimatum.
games
All
and
the
making more
uniques from
guides for you
Metamorph
guys.
are now global.
And as you
However,
guys gonna see in
Catalysts
the
are gonna be
future, I'll have
specific
different
to
ranks and also
Ultimatum.
perk
And yeah,
advantages
Ultimatum
and
fragments,
also
instead
special
of granting you
events
access
and
to the
also
boss,
special
they
features for
combine into a
members
unique
like
jewel.
account
We
reviews,
don't yet know what that
perfecting the build
unique
for you
jewel
guys,
is, but
and
jewels
also
are pretty damn
co-op
powerful in
gameplay,
Path of
and
Exile.
also
It's the
even
rework.
special
I think
future
that unique
videos for
jewel
you
is gonna
guys
be
on your
pretty
special
strong.
build for
And
different
map
members.
quantity scales Catalyst rewards. So if there's a stack of 2 Catalyst rewards and you have 100% increased map quantity, maybe that's gonna double. I don't know exactly what the formula is for that, but essentially what that means is that, yeah, you'll be getting more catalysts depending on how much map quantity you have. Inscribed ultimatums is a specific map item drop that you can get from doing the ultimatums themselves. It is no longer a random drop. You know, in Ultimatum League, we used to get it just from random monsters. It is now rewarded specifically by the ultimatum mechanic. And what you can see here on the right is basically just like a map. You can access it. It's basically like an input and output, right? So it rewards you depending on what you put in. So there's opportunity for you to double your currency. So there will be ultimatum rewards that say sacrifice 2 divines to gain 4 divines, right? But if you were to fail it, of course, you get 0. So you have the potential to double your divines at a cost. People are going to be selling these at like lesser value than what you can get out of it, as you'll be expected to be able to complete them on builds that are made for farming them, which is pretty cool because that means that you'll be able to create builds that are specific to farming inscribed ultimatums, as you know I have and some other people have done in the past, and that's pretty good content as well because it's essentially you're putting up a lot on the line, a lot of currency, get some other stuff out. There's also going to be ways to upgrade uniques, so there's going to be inscribed ultimatums which you drop that are going to give you the chance to, you know, maybe you put in a Worm's Mole and what you get out of it is a Headhunter or potentially a Mage Blood or something like that. And also double divination cards, so you maybe put in 1 apothecary and you get 2 apothecaries out of it, right? Essentially that's what inscribed ultimatums are, and they're very cool because it'll give you a new way to play Path of Exile essentially. You know, you'll be able to create groups of people, and there'll be people specialized in actually farming these. Alright, so I talked a little bit about ultimatum encounter types. But there are different types of ultimatums. It's going to be one of 4 different types. So this is specifically the in-map ultimatums. So there are the options to defeat waves of enemies. That means that you'll basically have a progress bar, and as you kill enemies, that progress bar fills. This set tends to be the fastest one to progress. The second one is to survive. So you basically have a timer and you need to survive for that duration. You know, obviously you need to kill monsters as you probably get overwhelmed, the monsters keep spawning and stuff like that. But this is more geared towards like if you have maybe a build that is more tanky but doesn't deal an insane amount of damage, you'll probably do better in this one. Then in the stone circles is quite annoying, as there's going to be a bunch of random targeted attacks as well as ground effects and that kind of stuff. But basically, there are these circles and you step inside them and it charges up the bar. And so yeah, you can basically like walk in and out of them and the bar still gets charged. It doesn't like reset back to 0. So yeah, you'll be basically slowly progressing towards completing the ultimatum by stepping in and out and still dodging out of things. But this one by far is the most annoying one because yeah, staying stationary in Path of Exile generally means death, right? You don't want that. And the next one is Protect the Altar. So this thing spawned in the middle and monsters will try to kill it, and basically you have to kill them so they don't kill it. That is basically it. Or you could have like weird things like potentially spawning you know, taunt totems or anything like that. Yeah, those are the ultimatum types in maps. And what you will have is you'll get one reward each wave. So each wave you'll get this window popping up and you'll choose between, you know, A or B. Yeah, you get to keep one of two of them. Sometimes you get, you know, like a no-brainer, but other times you get, you know, two valuable rewards that you might have to choose between. So yeah, and the rewards ramp up in later waves. So you'll start out at some like measly currency and you'll end up at here, as you can see, wave 13, the guy's getting 3 divine orbs, or it could be even crazier stuff, right? It could be mage bloods, it could be mirrors, it could be basically anything. And of course, rarity is dependent, like the developers are going to have all that stuff coded and sorted out. You're going to see some crazy stuff, people getting some pretty interesting loot. And yeah, all the loot drops at the end in one loot explosion. So it's not like you can cash out at certain points and continue. So you'll have to either, you know, stop and take everything or continue and risk everything. You die or walk out of the circle, again, you lose. So make sure that you do not walk out of the enclosed or the area that ultimatum tells you to stay in. And in general, ultimatums are going to be a great source of, you know, currency, scarabs, and catalysts. You'll be getting a ton of that bubblegum currency and things to trade around to other players. So it's just going to be a nice way to accumulate a bunch of stuff and in general a really good currency maker, I think, as long as you have a build that can handle it. I think additionally, one of the coolest things about Ultimatum is that we are getting well-rolled rares. In Ultimatum League, this was the first time they introduced this concept, and unfortunately they haven't actually shown us this since, aside for Heist actually. At the end of Grand Heist sometimes you see this as well. But what that means is that you know, in lower waves you will be getting a lot of rare rewards, and these rares will actually be pretty decent, you'll notice. That's because they implemented this weird, like, well-rolled type of system where if you get a helmet, it's going to have life and resistances, boost will have, you know, movement speed and that kind of stuff. It's very useful for early gearing and progression. When you get into maps, if you see an ultimatum, always look at it, you know, don't skip it, even in early progression, as you never know if it might have, like, a really decent rare, even on the first wave, right? Even just looking at the first wave and being like, oh, yo, that's pretty good, taking that and then moving on, that's going to be pretty decent for your early progression. So yeah, make sure you check that out. And yeah, back to mirrored inscribed ultimatums. This is where the ultimate risk versus reward comes in, because yeah, essentially these are going to be substantially cheaper than mirrors, and they create a copy of the original item just as a mirror would. However, if you fail or disconnect or anything happens, it deletes both. Both are gone. Poof. You know, it's like basically just rip bozo. You'll never get your item back no matter what. And you can see that these have some pretty crazy mods here in this one here that I found still on trade. So yeah, you really need to be careful by which inscribed ultimatum you buy or run, because yeah, you'll need to familiarize yourself with what mods your build is good at and what mods to avoid. Some mods are hated by everybody, and those mods will be sold at a much cheaper price. So again, if you manage to create a build or are good at running these, you can make insane amount of currency doing the very high risk ones. But if you do end up actually failing one, it could set you back pretty much all of the profit you've made up until that point. So you know how it is. Staff of Dawn, and yeah, the rest is history. But yeah, new rewards. This is pretty cool. There are some that we don't know quite yet. But in general, Tainted Catalysts is one of the cooler ones, which allows you to get a random quality onto a piece of jewelry. So if you have a jewelry that is corrupted, you can now actually gamble, you know, a 1 in 20 chance to get between 1 to 20% quality of a random type of catalyst. So it's a 1 in 10 chance to get the type of catalyst you want, and a 1 in 20 chance to get up to 20%. So you'll probably just be like settling, you know, if you hit like 17% of the catalyst that you want, you'll settle for that. You'll never try to go for 20%, unless you're like super rich or super stupid. One of the two, you decide. But yeah, essentially these are probably going to be pretty plentiful, as I suspect a lot of people are going to be running Ultimatum. And one other unique that they showed off that is pretty cool is the Ichland's Temptation Gold Ring. There's going to be very high variance on these rolls probably, and there is so many rolls of, you know, not super high, like the numbers of them are pretty low, because you can have up to maximum of 200% quality, meaning that these modifiers will be multiplied by, you know, will be tripled once you apply a Tainted Catalyst at 200% of its quality. So imagine like this rolls up to 20%. If you were to catalyze this and it hits critical strike at 200%, you basically got 60% critical strike multiplier, which is pretty damn crazy. You can't get nothing nearly as crazy as that on a ring. Probably the highest
And
DPS
you
ring
can see that during the testing replays,
outside
I have
of,
to
you
clear
know,
the full
like charge implicits or that kind of stuff. So pretty cool ring overall, but it's gonna be pretty impossible to get one with the right quality at 200% or close to. Yeah, I think it's a cool unique, very cool design, and would be cool to see more uniques like this in the future now that they have actually created the Tainted Catalyst, right? Yeah, it's pretty damn cool. Props to GGG. Next, the old uniques are coming back, and I assume these are going to have the same drop rate as they did in the past, but we never know. So that the Glimpse of Chaos, the Relic of the Pact, you know, Temptation Steps, Yamax Accord, Mahuk Subtle, and the Hate Forge. Hate Forge, keep in mind that builds that usually had excelled with it are kind of bad now. So it's not as exciting as it used to be. However, seeing Mahuk Subtle, Relic of the Pact, and Glimpse of Chaos at potentially being less rare because of the fact that so many people will be running Ultimatum and the boss is very exciting, because these items are some of the coolest uniques that they've ever made. We'll talk about them here a little bit. So Relic of the Pact, essentially what it does is it reserves your life, and you can unreserve it and just basically blow up around your character. So it's like you have to really build around it. It's not just like a generic weapon, it is literally your build, right? Yeah, having it at 20% drop rate and more people killing the Trial Master, it's going to be pretty interesting. And especially with the Warlock power, Crimson power, you'll be able to stack an insane amount of life. You know, I've seen Captain Lance say that it's possible to get up to 30 to 40,000 life with this. And what this means is that since the damage of this weapon scales with the amount of life that you're able to reserve and unreserve, you're going to deal a ton of damage, right? So it's pretty exciting to see the amount of like one-shot stuff that you'll be able to do with this wand. Next is the Glimpse of Chaos, and I love this item. Every league I try to make sort of a live search, and it's my, you know, Magic Find helmet, and I found some pretty crazy helmets so far. As you can see in the top right, that's one of the helmets that I found. But let's explain a little bit about what this is. The Glimpse of Chaos is going to be an item that has specific modifiers on it, and it can be corrupted. Just like the Cirrus Gloves, as you corrupt it, it can modify the item, right? It can remove or it can add affixes onto the item. So as you can see, it has increased maximum life and reduced fire resistance, increased maximum mana and reduced cold resistance, and increased global energy shield, reduced lightning resistance. Imagine you are just playing a life build and you don't care about mana and lightning resistance. If you corrupt it, there's a chance that you will remove these two, so you remove the downside of those two modifiers, and you're left with 40% increased maximum life and reduce fire resistance. So it's much easier to mitigate the downside, and you get a ton from the upside, right? So that's pretty damn cool. And yeah, chaos resistance is 0. This can also be corrupted off, meaning that if you are playing a build that is chaos positive, right, you definitely don't want to have that. And most builds these days, they will get up to like 50%, around 50% plus, you know, 75% is ideal. But yeah, corrupting that off is pretty ideal. Keep in mind, you can corrupt off cannot be modified while corrupted, meaning that if that happens, it's bricked, right? And then on top of that, corrupting it can also re-roll the implicit, and that's what you see here. This list of implicits are things that you can roll, and there's some pretty crazy ones and also some pretty mid ones, but the crazy ones are, for example, Skills Fire an additional projectile, or Air of Effect 25% is pretty damn good. Increased effect of non-curse auras as well. This one is very expensive, and also increased quantity of items found is very, very expensive too. As well as socketed skill gems get 80% cost reservation multiplier. So yeah, I mean, the helmet itself with these implicits is not that good. They are pretty expensive because of the fact that people like to gamble on these. And they like to gamble on these because either if it goes to a rare item or a unique item, which is another outcome that it can have with the corruption, it can become some pretty crazy stuff. So you can see here a Devoto with 7% increased quantity. People are selling for like 150 divines, right? This one didn't sell, so maybe it wasn't worth 150, but it has potential for it, right? And another outcome, of course, is like, as you can see here on the top right, it becomes rare. and you can get, you know, obviously it's like throwing a Chaos Orb at an item when it becomes rare, so you can get some pretty insane stats. This is the helmet that I bought this league on my Magic Finder, and it ended up rolling with 14, you know, T1 suppression, T2 life, as well as T1 rarity, with 7% increased quantity of items found implicit. And I bought this for 100 divines. I think it's worth a lot more, but it was really cool to find, and I just got it helmet enchanted. Yeah, another bonus is that, of course, you don't have to actually get your helmets enchanted anymore, which is huge, because yeah, you don't have to give your helmet anymore to some guy to run in lab or run it yourself. So it opens up the possibilities for people to just like, they drop an item, they corrupt it, it's insane, and use it straight away, instead of being like, oh, I'll be able to use it in like 1 week when this guy comes back to me, or he comes back saying I didn't get it or whatever, right? And then pay him X amount of money. That's really exciting. Less friction to play the game. I think it's just good in general. So that's the Glimpse of Chaos. I could talk more about it, but yeah, very exciting. We got the rework Yawmax. Not super excited about this one because it's very situational and also kind of garbage. But essentially, they've changed the entire item to now it causes Val non-aura skills to have 80% less soul cost. So, you know, when you have like your souls that you need to spend for your Val skill, it uses 80% of those, less of those. And yeah, you can stack these modifiers. You can have 2 Yawmax, but you know, it's multiplicative, so it's not going to be 160% less. You know, you need to have reduced for it to actually get to 0 soul cost. So yeah, it's going to be, I think, 97%, I think. So it's still good, but you'll still have some soul cost there. But the downside of it, of course, is that every time you use the skill, that soul cost is increased by 100%. It means that you want to be using this on Val skills that you use only once every 8 seconds. Or more than 8 seconds. So one that comes to mind is potentially doing Val Earthquake, right? So that could be kind of cool because Val Earthquake has a secondary duration of 12 seconds, so it outlasts the downside. However, you'll be using a pretty terrible weapon. It's going to be kind of weird for you to scale the damage. You'll probably just have to play like a stacker, like a strength stacker, and getting your boots from replica Alberons, or dual wielding, and then just being okay with like one weapon being terrible. Obviously, there's downsides to this, and very hard to fit into a build, but maybe someone comes up with something crazy. You never know. That's the beauty about Path of Exile. A 1 elk unique can become priceless if one guy just discovers a broken interaction. That is the genius behind a lot of these items, honestly. And yeah, now that we rambled on a little bit about uniques, I wanted to talk about the ultimatum modifiers, and these are just some of the modifiers that I deem to be the worst. There are more modifiers, but just to give you an idea of what the really bad ones are and what you want to avoid. There's going to be more modifiers. They said they're adding a bunch more. Yeah, keep that in mind as well. So you got Choking Miasma. This is really bad if you have a build that doesn't have capped chaos resistance. As you know, there will be chaos clouds all around your ultimatum, and since it's an enclosed area, sometimes you have to run through it. If you don't have high chaos resistance, this is going to deal an insane amount of damage to you. That's pretty one to avoid. Escalating damage taken, this is universally bad for every build. It's going to ramp up, and as the encounter goes on, you get to 50%, and then it lasts at 50% for the remainder of the encounter. So you'll be taking 50% increased damage. It's not good. That's like max shock. Yeah, you'll be much more likely to die if a monster hits you or anything happens. And you have escalating monster speed. Much like the escalating damage taken horrible, it's going to ramp up to 50% increased speed. That also increases the speed of the traps and things like that. I feel like, for example, the flaming skulls that we'll go over after are actually coded to be untargetable and undamageable minions or enemies, right? So they'll actually be getting additional speed as well. It can be really bad because they deal a lot of damage. So yeah, one to avoid too, for sure. Less cooldown recovery. This could be bad for certain builds, not all builds. But for example, if you're a cast when damage taken build, cast on crit build, or a build that relies on a cooldown, like Frostblink or something like that. This is especially bad because, yeah, 5 times longer to recharge. That means that you deal 5 times less damage. And lightning damage from mana cost also doesn't affect all builds the same. If you do, you know, if you're a spellcaster and your mana cost is 100, that is going to be multiplied by 1000%. So that is a lot of damage that you take, but of course you can mitigate that through damage reduction as well as resistances. You'll be taking a substantial less amount of damage, but still pretty bad, and you can kill yourself, especially if you have a high cast rate, right? So yeah, one to keep in mind for sure, depending on your build. Now, on to the worst ones by far. Limited flask. Basically, using a flask removes any existing flask. That means that you can only have 1 active flask at a time. Especially bad because a lot of builds actually rely on flasks, like Pathfinders and things like that will be capping their resistance with flask. Especially now that we all use instilling orbs, it's really bad because our instilling orbs are going to automatically use flasks. And imagine you're a Pathfinder that taps your resistance with a flask. You won't be able to choose that specific flask unless you remove your instilling orbs or whatever. So in that situation, you're kind of screwed. Occasional impotence, it makes you not deal any damage for 2 seconds every 8 seconds. So yeah, that's 20% of the time you won't deal damage, which can be especially bad if you're in later waves and you get overwhelmed in those 2 seconds or you're not expecting it. You know, in PoE, damage is actually one of your greatest defenses. It can be pretty bad. Now, Raging Dead is the skulls that I was talking about earlier. So there's going to be a bunch of skulls there, and their speed is actually increased by your map modifiers and stuff like that. So yeah, they can deal a lot of damage and kill you essentially, especially if you have, you know, minus max or something like that. Treacherous auras is probably the least worst one of the lot, but it makes it so that your auras affect allies as well as enemies. So if you have a juiced up haste, monsters are also going to be juiced up by it. It's not so bad if you're running with an Aurabot, because people are going to say, oh, like, oh, the Aurabots are screwed, right? No, not really, because if you're running with an Aurabot, you're pretty much immortal anyways, and it won't matter. There are situations where things can get pretty intense. Those are all the bad mods, but these are the worst mods, which is Ruin, because Ruin unconditionally makes you lose Ultimatum. So Ruin is a type of debuff that is not harmful. You get that stacks up to 7, and once you have 7 Ruin, Ultimatum is over, GG. So Ruin will make it so that 2 monsters basically are gain this buff, and when they hit you, you get 1 stack of Ruin. And then you have Restless Ground, which creates patches on the floor that essentially resurrects monsters that inflict Ruin. So again, if you get 7 stacks, you're dead. In Stalking Ruin, there's going to be these phantasms walking around that once you get to level 3 and level 4, essentially, you know, they're going to be faster, and they throw projectiles at you, and they have like this little splash damage animation on the floor. If you get hit by that, yeah, again, gonna ruin your time. So definitely is something that you want to stay away from, especially if you're running inscribed ultimatums and mirroring staffs. That is not a good one. These are by far the worst. So now that we talked a little bit about all of the bad modifiers that you want to stay away from, talk a bit about the Atlas passives, because there's some really interesting ones here. They've designed some pretty damn cool stuff. There's the Uber Ultimatum Keystone, Ruling Gauntlet, which basically makes it so you cannot choose your ultimatum modifiers. So that's the downsides that we just showed. You cannot show them. You might need to have a build that can adapt to all of these. There isn't really any build that can do all of them, but maybe somebody comes up with something, right? The upside of it is that you get 3 additional rounds. And as we talked about earlier, the later rounds will get better and better rewards, and that will be sort of at 13 you might get all the crazy stuff like Mage Blood, divination cards of like high rarity and all that kinds of stuff. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what you can get beyond 10, on top of the fact that you'll be able to get scarabs and then scale beyond that. But that's a little bit about on that later. And the downside, you know, is that you cannot spawn the boss. So if you want to be farming the boss, of course you don't want to do this, but depending on how much the spawn rate of the boss is, I think this one is definitely going to be worth, absolutely going to be worth if you want to farming ultimatum. Almost going to be a no-brainer for sure, which is cool to see, but also, you know, a lot of these keystones should be more of a choice in my opinion, and the upside is really outweighs the cons. So like on softcore, you are going to be clicking this for sure. I could see it being maybe a choice on hardcore, as long as the rewards are compelling enough in the earlier waves, right? Next, we'll talk about the notables that buff Inscribed Ultimatum drop chance. So Inscribed Ultimatums are divided in 3. There's going to be Divination, Unique, as well as Currency ones. And depending on which node you take here, it's going to increase the chance of that one dropping. However, they are all good, right? We talked a little bit about it earlier, but there are currency ones that can duplicate divination divine currencies, as well as potentially give you also mirrors, stuff like that. Not mirrors, but the potential to mirror items. And there's divination ones that can duplicate, good divination cards like the Doctor as well as the Apothecary, right? And of course, there are also unique ones which can upgrade bad uniques into good uniques. So speccing into these is just going to be actually just up to you. It's a choice. However, you know, for me, a min-maxer or whatever, I prefer not to put my points into something like this, as I think all of them are good. So I wouldn't really mind getting any of these. But for example, if you're playing SSF and you want to target farm uniques more, and these inscribed ultimatums are actually really common, then going for the unique one is going to be pretty advantageous for you. So yeah, the choice is there, and it's nice that the developers actually create choice. There's also, I find like the player base a lot of the time looks at things in a narrow way, that they say like, oh, why even make it if it's garbage? Well, the thing is, you can always adapt your playstyle to your own preferences. And there is also always going to be people playing the game in a different way than you. And I think there's also room for there to be like mechanics that are good for solo self-found as well as Trade League, right? A lot of the time they design around Trade League, but in some situations it doesn't hurt to have extra passives here that you do not have to take. That's really nice to have, I think, in general. Now, Ultimatum boss spawn. Depending on how much on rate the boss actually has, these ones are also conditional. But, you know, if the uniques end up being really expensive, and the spawn rate is kind of reasonable, that can be pretty good. But the consensus on it was that in Ultimatum it was between 1 to 3% spawn chance. Now, this might have been my chat being extremely pessimistic. There is a 70% increased chance to spawn the boss, so imagine if you have a 1% chance, then you'll have a 1.7% chance to spawn the boss. But I suspect it's probably going to be around 5%. Buffing that by 70% is going to be pretty good. Yeah, hopefully it's higher. I really do hope to see it farmable for people that want to do that. But keep in mind that the boss can be pretty tough, right? And you are going to be going into the maps with your mapping build, so you can't really swap character onto a bossing character unless you just call in a friend or something like that, right? So yeah, you're going to have a character that both is decent at doing the in-map ultimatums as well as the boss. It's a mapper mechanic. That's what it is. These nodes, again, pretty conditional. I probably won't take them because I think the keystone is too good. That's what I'll do. This keystone I think is really good, Ruinous Wager, because it's good for early. You know, essentially it risks you losing your ultimatums to ruin rather than dying, because the monsters are going to deal 50% less damage to you, so it becomes more about like, oh, let me dodge around, right? And this is pretty good on builds that have like higher damage, or builds in general that wouldn't be able to complete an ultimatum otherwise, as well as potentially block or evasion builds, as I think you can dodge and evade and block ruin in most situations. However, that might have been quoted differently, or I might be misremembering. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that, but yeah, potential for that. And this one is really cool because you get to tailor how you play Ultimatum. So as we talked about at the beginning of the video, there are 4 different types of Ultimatum. There's going to be Stand in the Circle, Kill Monsters, Outlast, as well as Defend the Altar, right? Stand in the Circles as well as Outlast is going to be better for builds that don't have very high damage but are tanky, as well as whereas Defend the Altar and Kill Monsters is going to be for more high damage fast builds. Yeah, depending on which build you are, you will be choosing Kill Monsters because it's just faster than all the other ones. Honestly, like it's 3 times as fast. At least it was in Ultimatum League. You would be in and out of a map so much faster if you just picked the kill waves of monsters instead. Assuming that these are all 25% chance each, it being buffed by 100% means it's gonna be like 50% chance to get the ultimatum type that you want, which is pretty reasonable, and I'm really happy to see that for sure, because my main gripe about Ultimatum was that anytime I would get Stand in the Circles, I would probably skip it as it wasn't really worth it in Ultimatum League. But now you have opportunity cost, of course, because you're going to be investing in Scarabs as well if you want to target farm it. So that means that like you won't be skipping any of them, right? So you'll just feel kind of bad when you don't get the good ones, but you'll be getting the good one more often, which is really nice. So thank you for that. I'm excited about that for sure. And 2 more notes here, which are really damn cool, coolest notables for sure, and that's the Gamba notables. So the downsides are gonna give you more rewards. So high downsides, bigger rewards, which it's pretty much the theme of Ultimatum. So yeah, Stand Your Ground is Ultimatum encounters in your maps get 3% reduced radius each round, so the circle will get smaller. Mind you, the circle is pretty big, so you'll have a decent amount of room, but if you are doing 13 waves, you know, it's gonna get pretty small in there. 39% less radius is pretty substantial. Yeah. But the upside of it is that you're going to be getting rewards as though you've completed an additional round, which, you know, it means that when you get to round 13, it's as if you've done round 14. And yeah, that's pretty good also for the earlier rounds. You just be able to ramp up quicker, as the earlier rewards are pretty bad. And the next one, prove yourself worthy, is Ultimatum modifiers in your map starts at a tier higher if possible. So that means that if you have, you know, like the Choking Miasma one, it's going to start at T2. This is the downside. You do not like that. It's going to be pretty bad for some cases. And these go up to T4. So they ramp up pretty damn quick, yeah. And the upside of it is that Ultimatum rewards in your map have a 25% chance to be duplicated, which is insane because you have 13 rewards and all of them roll 25% chance to be duplicated. So that means that if you do 10 waves, 2.5 of your rewards are going to be duplicated. And you're just going to be kind of hoping that it's going to be the rewards more in the later half of the ultimatum rather than the first half. So imagine you get like, I don't know, 3 divines or 100%. I'm telling you, this league, there's going to be Reddit posts of people, which I don't know where they are. They don't exist, but they're not me. It's never me. Gonna be people duplicating Mage Bloods, Headhunters, and Mirror inscribed ultimatums. It's gonna happen, I'm telling you. Hopefully it's me this time. Pretty sure? Yeah, I really like these notables. So, extra gamble, more risk, more reward. Really cool. Thanks, GGG. And yeah, here we talk about the spawn chance. So the spawn chance is important if you want to farm it. You can get up to 40% additional, 45% additional spawn chance. That is 52% if you also have stream of consciousness. So that's pretty nice. And I think 57%, 57 if you also include the base chance. So that's pretty cool. And that can scale up to 75% chance if you block everything and have stream of consciousness as well. That's pretty high investment in terms of passive skills. So if you want to go the route of scarabs, you can, because they are turning metamorph scarabs into ultimatum scarabs. And then on top of them, guaranteeing ultimatum to show up, they're also giving you rewards as though you've completed additional rounds. And I would imagine that, for example, on the normal one, you have +1. This will be, actually, this is probably just Spawn's ultimatum. This will be +1, this will be +2, and maybe this is +4, right? As usually scarabs trend in that you get double as many from winged scarabs. It could be pretty interesting to see whether it's actually worth to do winged scarabs, and maybe I see myself farming them at some point this league to see whether it's worth doing. And then on top of that, you have on the map device for 10 chaos chance to guarantee spawn ultimatum. So yeah, depending on what you're doing, it might be worth it or not, but it's not going to be worth it for people that juice maps, as ultimatums themselves won't be dropping loot, right? This will be just a specific mechanic for people that want to farm the mechanic and not farm monsters. So for juicers and magic finders, they'll stick to strong boxes and keep the ultimatum scarab cheap, basically. Well, not cheap, but like cheaper because of the demand being specific to only people that want to farm ultimatum. And that is it. That is actually it. There was a lot to talk about. Ultimatum is a pretty it's actually a simple mechanic, honestly, guys. It's really fun. You just go in there, you go carrot and stick approach, you just see the divine orb, you click it, and you're like, yo, and you fail and you're sad, but if you don't fail, you're happy, right? So yeah, go out there and enjoy Ultimatum. It's gonna be great. It's a really good addition to the base game. I am really happy that it's back, and I'm really looking forward to making some maybe strategy around it, but mostly just figuring out how much currency you can get out of it in general and how much cool stuff I'll be able to find in the league. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, guys. It's a long one again, I'm sorry, but thank you, boys. Have a good night, everybody. Hope to see you guys again soon. Peace out. Sheesh, my throat.
Hello, this is One Mana Left, and today I'm going to do a long requested video on a guide to Deep Delve. Now, Delve for the longest time was something that the people who were actually going really deep kept a lot of the information secret because it was very profitable and slightly competitive too. So the few people out there that were making it really deep in Delve would oftentimes do private profiles. They'd keep all their cards close to their chest. And since the Delve rework in Scourge League, it's still kind of been that way, but the profit's gone at the bottom. But there's not really any content out there that is really targeted at Deep Delve. There's maybe a little bit of content on YouTube that is just generic Delve information. But there are a few things that change as you get really far down. So this video, I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about, one, the things that are actually different at Deep Delve versus Shallow, because like I said, there's not a lot of content on there. That transitions into a discussion about the HP cap, which there's really no content anywhere that in-depth talks about the HP cap or any of the other caps in the game, the ailment cap. People loosely know about the dot cap, which is tied into this. But these caps in the game, they really become apparent in Deep Delve. but they also do affect the rest of the game just in a lesser manner, because most of the rest of the game doesn't get to these absurd numbers like Deep Delve does. But if things keep going the way they're going, they'll begin to impact the game more and more. Although I'm guessing that will reset with PoE 2. But then I'm going to talk about how to do some of the hardest nodes in Delve, being the actual super difficult nodes and the 3 bosses in Delve. Ahwatalti, Kurgal, which we're on now, and All. And finally, I'm going to talk about where the money is in Delve, because I did make a pretty decent amount of money this league delving. I have a character that's probably all together, all things combined, worth like 15 mirrors. Maybe a third of that was from Delve. I made a lot of money bossing and stuff and boss rushing, but there's certainly money to be made in Delve. It's not the greatest money in the entire game, but if your build is an absolute monster, the Delve money suddenly becomes fairly good. So let's get into the introduction here, because you'll see right now that I'm in, I have a Kurgal in front of me, and we're at depth 5,356. And there's a modifier here that says 70% more monster life. Well, here's the interesting thing that I'm going to use this example to show off here. If I go to a spreadsheet here and go to depth 5,300, the monster HP is 600 times. The base HP on Kurgal is 62 million. So 62 million times 600 times would put him to 37 billion HP. Then I have this zone modifier that's 70% more life, which would put it up to 63 billion. I'm also here with 5 other players in a 6-person party, which is times 6 life. That would put the health of this Kurgal at 400 billion HP. Which, even when you factor in the damage reductions on Uber bosses, this would be 1,500 times more HP than an Uber Pinnacle boss. If there's a build out there that can kill an Uber Pinnacle boss in 2.5 seconds, if this monster had this much HP, it would take that build over an hour to kill this boss. And this boss has 2 different HP bars. You have to kill him once in phase 1, and then again he resurrects in phase 2, which would put his actual HP to double that, and now we're getting to close to 1 trillion. So that would mean even a build that kills an Uber Pinnacle boss in 1 second would take around an hour to kill this, if this had that much HP. So I'm going to show this off. I'm going to do this boss, and the guys in this party are probably going to die, but they're all going to tag him to make sure this has 6 times HP. So I'm going to show this off. I'm going to do this boss, and alright, tag him. Guys in this party are probably going to die. Alright, now I'm going to kill him. He's dead. So, you guys might think that, well, 6 people did the damage there. As you might see later on, I would say that the damage dealt there was 99.9% me. The Righteous Fire character was not doing the fullest damage. I'm gonna try to keep him alive though. I'm rooting for. Alright, he's dead. That was not 6 people doing damage. That was mainly 1 person doing the damage there, as you'll see in these next burns, because he'll die at the exact same pace. I'm gonna try to keep him alive though. Oh, I have no flares. That's really awkward. Ah, I did this. Okay, that's potentially bad. 6 people doing damage. That was mainly 1. All right, he's out. As you'll see in these next. And like I said, he dies the exact same pace. Oh, I have no flares. That's really awkward. All right. So, how fast did this guy die? About that fast. All right. So get a good idea of how long that took. Okay. Offline. 4 dead and offline. So, you saw roughly it was like 1 to 2 seconds to phase him. Maybe right at 2 seconds in the last phase. So if you think he has that, if you think that last phase, which is a resurrected HP bar of another 400 billion, I killed it in right under 2 seconds. That would mean I have 200 billion DPS. Well, I have a lot of DPS. It's into the billions, but it is not 200 billion. So I am going to show you now a different boss. It'll be the same boss, but there's a difference here. The boss I'm going to show you now is at depth 871. So there's a Kurgal here that is the same boss. Now, if I look at the graph here for the HP at 871, it is 29 times HP. So it's 62 million times 29, which is 1.8 billion. In Path of Exile, the maximum HP is 2.147 billion. You cannot have a bigger number in a 32-bit game than that, because that's the maximum signed integer. It's one lower than 2 to the 31st power, because there's positive and negative numbers, so the negative numbers take up half of your 2 to the 32nd. So let's look at the exact same boss again, with the difference in health multiplier is 600 versus 29. The other zone had a 1.7 times HP multiplier, and we were in a 6-person party. So that Kurgal I just did should have 200 times the HP of this Kurgal. Let's see if it looks any different. I'll give you a spoiler. It's actually not going to look much different. Remember how fast I was killing them before, right? A little bit of ramp, then like a 1 or 2 second phase. Oh, look. He died the exact same time. Like, if you played those two side by side, it is the exact same. Because that other boss doesn't actually have 200 times the HP of this boss. It has approximately the same. Once again, this one only has 1.8, so he's technically not HP capped. He's about, like, 85% of HP capped. So the other boss truly had about 20% more HP. But obviously, if the HP cap wasn't a thing, it would look night and day difference with 211 times difference in HP. But a 20% difference is minimal. It's going to look pretty similar side by side. Like, look at this. Same exact pace as the other kill. Like, about a 1 second burst. And then this phase is going to be about the same. Alright. If you played those two side by side, like I said, there's about a 20% HP difference when you factor in the fact that the HP cap is 2.147 billion, and that guy had like 1790, right? So it's a 20% HP difference. But that should be a blindingly obvious demonstration that there is a clear HP cap in the game, and this does start to influence things in Deep Delve. So I thought I'd use that as an intro. Let's get into some of the different talking points. This is going to be a long video. I don't necessarily expect people to watch the entire thing. It's probably going to be like an hour. I will try to have everything timestamped in the description. So if you have something that you really want to know about, you should be able to just go to the timestamp in the description. I'm not going to put like mid-reel ads or anything in this. Like, if you are struggling on an all, and you just want to know how to beat all, I will have a timestamp in the description for all, and you can go and watch those mechanics. So whatever you want to watch specifically, you should be able to jump to the timestamp. But if you are really wanting to learn a lot about Delve, there should be something in this video for you to learn. If you know absolutely nothing about Delve, you might be better off watching like a few different intro videos. But I'll go over some of the generic stuff as well. But even if you're someone who knows virtually everything there is about Deep Delve, you might still learn some things in this video. Like, Ben, for example, I watched him delve a little bit this league. I was in his chat. He was at depth 1800 in hardcore. Ben is one of the most knowledgeable overall PoE players, but he clearly had almost no understanding of what the HP cap was, or like what depth the HP cap started to appear at, stuff like that. Like, there's an example of someone who's like, you know, the best Path of Exile player that doesn't understand these things fully. So, unless you're like 2 or 3 people in the entire world, you will probably learn at least one thing from this video. And I'm looking at Rudy in chat right now, and he knows he's one of those 2 or 3 people. So I'm going to go over 4 main things. The first is the HP cap. The second is like the numerical requirements. I might totally do this out of order for what I'm saying right now. But the order I'm not saying now doesn't matter. The third is where the money is. People like money. And the fourth is the individual node guides, like how do you beat a Time Lost, how do you beat a Beyond, how do you beat a Kurgal, how do you beat a All. And like I said, I'll try to make it so you can timestamp to all these. Okay, so let's talk HP cap, because that's what we're talking about right now. So I've already kind of gone over this, but in this game there's an HP cap of 2.147 billion. This does influence the game outside of Delve as well. Some people who have no idea about the HP cap and don't really deep delve at all, they clearly know what the dot cap is. If you go and you talk about a build, if you play some crazy Ignite build or Poison build, you might see people talking and saying that they have dot cap. What is dot cap? The reason there's a dot cap in Path of Exile is because for whatever reason when the game was first coded, dots are coded as damage per minute. And since the biggest number in the game is 2.147 billion, and dots are coded as damage per minute, it's 2.147 billion divided by 60 seconds, which means a dot in Path of Exile cannot do more than 35.8 million DPS. Which makes dot builds very, very, very bad for Deep Delve. If you want to make it deep in Delve, you're probably not going to be playing a dot build. The only exception there's ever been to that was Oscar's Poison Spark, which was a very tanky build. It was before Arch Nemesis was added to Deep Delve and the rest of the game too. And it was a build that had about 70 mil DPS because it had like 35 mil hit DPS and 35 mil poison DPS. So it could kill a max HP monster in about 30 seconds. That was the like exception to the rule. But because there's a dot cap, you really don't want to have 60 seconds to kill something that is like the common HP that things have down there. But this HP cap does start to influence the rest of the game too, though. People always ask, why doesn't GGG just buff the bottom skills and keep the good skills the same? You know, why nerf the top skills? Why not just keep the top skills the same and every patch buff the bottom skills to be the same as that? They will never talk about this answer because they never want to talk about the HP cap. But 100% the reason for that, you can throw aside any like ARPG philosophy, and like, you know, there is the common argument of they'd have to buff the bosses every league if they did that. But honestly, the single biggest thing that they will not talk about is because they're very aware that there's an HP cap, and if you just buff everything, you will eventually hit that HP cap in like a very short amount of time from power creep. You gotta remember, this game has been around for like 11 or 12 years, and we've still power crept into some pretty absurd numbers with them having the nerf philosophy. But if they got rid of the nerf philosophy and just buffed everything every patch, it would take like 3 patches for everything to be doing like HP cap damage. It would not take long at all. If you think I'm insane in saying this, look at Diablo 3. Diablo 3 had the philosophy that they would never nerf anything, they would only buff the bottom skills, which is a very like, that's what the fans want, right? That's what the people ask for. Diablo 3 started off as a game where, like, Kruparian killing Diablo was doing, like, 50k DPS. By the end of it, if you fast forward, like, 8 years, they were not limited by the 32-bit cap. They were limited by the 64-bit cap. Diablo 3 is coded in 64-bit, which means their number cap is not 2.147 billion. It's 2 to the 63rd. That means their number cap is 9 quintillion. That is such an absurd number for a video game. And because they had this philosophy of never nerf, only buff, they got to a point where the Greater Rift bosses had to cap out at 150 because the bosses were at the 64-bit HP cap, 4 billion times higher than this game, and everything was at the HP cap already. So that's why in the final seasons of Diablo 3, the Greater Rifts capped at 150, and it went from being this content that you would take 15 minutes to beat to the rank 1 Greater Rifts on the leaderboard were like 1-minute rifts and people just doing speed 150s. Like, look how that game numerically fell apart because of their number limit, because they had the philosophy of never nerf, only buff. Well, this game has a limit that is 4 billion times lower than Diablo 3. It is not 9 quintillion, it is only 2 to the 31st, which is only 2 billion. Same as RuneScape. That's max gold in RuneScape if that number looks familiar. So, okay. Because of that, though, they have this philosophy of nerf, don't buff. And through doing that, they've managed to stay under the HP cap for all these years. But even still, it's already influencing game design above ground. Like, Uber Pinnacle bosses have a modifier that says 70% damage reduction. If you go fight an Uber Exarch, it has a 70% damage reduction. Because normally they have 75 million health. So instead, they could have just made them have 250 million health because they have a 70 damage reduction. So that they could have just made them have 250 million health. Why didn't they? HP cap. Simple. Because Exarch can have modifiers on him. He can have 2 boss modifiers on him that make him have 2.2 times HP. And then you could go into a 6-player party, and he's now over HP cap by like 60% or 50%, whatever. It's also because of dot cap too, because by having the 70% damage reduction, the dot cap is an absolute. So technically, if you have a build that has like poison dot cap at 35 mil, if you're way over dot cap, you're still capped at 35 mil, even if the monster has a 70% damage reduction. So on stuff like Ubers that have 70% damage reduction, poison dot cap is actually like 120 mil if they would have just, increased the health. But like, that's a clear example of them making game design choices that are purely dictated because of the number cap. That is why those game design choices were made, and it's for a reason most people don't consider. We're entering the 12th and final hour of Path of Exile 1. I'm assuming in PoE 2, the numbers will get squished quite a bit. But this final 1 to 2 years of PoE 1 will probably naturally have the largest numbers of any previous year. So this HP cap is becoming more and more influential on the game, and in these final 2 years of PoE 1, it's going to be ever present. If you've played Trial of the Ancestors this league, if you're ranked 2000 and you go into a party, especially even solo probably, and you try to kill a Tota 2000 Titan Shell, how much HP do you think it has? I don't know. I didn't do Tota to 2K, but I'm going to go ahead and guess it's 2.147 billion. Just a hunch. So there's an example of they have a league mechanic this league. It's the current league mechanic, and there's HP cap monsters. So it's something that's only going to grow more prevalent and more influential in the final 2 years of PoE 1. So that brings us back to Delve, because as I just showed you in Delve, Delve is an environment that the HP cap is very, very much there. And so a really weird thing happens because of that. Let's go ahead and pull open the spreadsheet I made here for the monster damage and monster HP. So there's something interesting that happens because of this HP cap. When you start to go down in depth and you start to get to around 1,000, you're already at the point where the boss monsters have HP cap. So the bosses in Delve have considerably more HP than anything else. They have the full like Shaper HP, where they have like a 62 million base. I think Shaper base HP at 84 zone is 72 mil, and most of the Delve bosses in 83 zone are 62 mil. So they have like the standard boss HP, which is much more than a rare monster. When you get to about depth 1000, that is the full 2 billion, and their HP relative to everything else is substantially more. And you might be at depth 1000, and you might be able to beat all these nodes easily. You might be some like Bone Shatter Juggernaut that just blows through nodes easily. You have no problem getting through these things. You can fight a Smuggler's Stash, you can fight a Time Lost Cavern, you can even fight a Beyond node maybe. Well, the boss there would have a lot of HP. But you are at a point where the trash monsters, the rares, the magics, they're not fighting back against you. You're able to kill them pretty fine. But you're a depth 1000 Bone Shatter Jug, and you go up and fight a all, and it's a 15-minute fight. Because that thing has a lot of HP relative to your damage. The thing is, though, after that point, this HP never increases. Ever. It's the same forever. From then until the end of time, it never changes. So, you only need to get to the point where you're at about 30 to 35 times, and the bosses will HP cap. From this point on, the bosses will never gain more HP, but they will gain damage. They will also gain ailment threshold. This is your bonus trivia question, right? When the bosses hit HP cap for the first time, they tend to have 2.147 billion health. But the way most bosses work in this game is because things like Shock are really unbalanced against a monster that has a ton of HP. So builds that depend on Chill and Shock would almost never Chill or Shock a full HP boss. Because of that, while rares and stuff, their ailment threshold is equal to their HP. Specifically for like pinnacle bosses, the ailment threshold is about a 10th of their HP. It's coded in the game as 2 separate numbers. The base HP of a Kurgal or an All is 72 million or 62 million. Let me open this up. PoEDB All. But the ailment threshold is going to be a lower number. It's going to be like 6 million. So if I go to All Val City boss and I go to 84 zone, okay? Like I said, 62 million base HP, but his ailment threshold is only about a 10th of that. So this is only a 7 million ailment threshold. So as he starts to get deeper and deeper, his ailment threshold will actually keep going up. So after HP cap, the shocks will still keep going down. This is not necessarily the most useful number, but there actually is an ailment cap. An ailment threshold cap. And it's not what you'd expect. This is your $1 million trivia question. When I say there's only 2 to 3 people in the game that know all these things, this is probably the single most obscure cap. Like, this is the most obscure number that the least people in Path of Exile know the answer to this. What is the ailment cap in Path of Exile? If you've been listening to me talk so far, you probably know, you probably have a good hunch that it's also 2.147 billion. That's a good guess. Oddly enough, it's not. What is the ailment cap in Path of Exile? If you've been listening to me talk so far, you probably know, you probably have a good hunch that it's also 2.147 billion. That's a good guess. Oddly enough, it's not.